Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the 38th lecture of this course. In the previous lecture, we have discussed the concept various types of data, in which the primary data has been a very important type of data. And there are various scientific way to collect this data. So, in this lecture, we are going to discuss the observation method of collecting the data. What is that? How it is done? That is the topic of this lecture. The observation method employs vision as the main method of primary data collection. It implies the use of eyes rather than of ears and the voice. It is to watch and note the phenomena as they happen. It is also regarding the cause and effect of the mutual relations. It is watching other person's behavior. For example, watching a bonded laborer's life, treatment of widows, life of daily travelers, life of beggars, life of physically challenged, migratory birds, migrant communities. If we say want to study the migratory birds, we cannot interview them. We cannot go with the questionnaire to them. What remains is observation. If suppose we are working on, say, a bonded labor's life, he has no option of giving an interview or responding to a questionnaire. The researcher has to observe. If we are studying the beggars, then beggars will not be prepared to give interviews or go with the questionnaire. They would not, in most probability, they would not be ready to cooperate because they do not want to expose their life. So, in such cases, observation is the only method of data collection, and as we have discussed that it implies vision as the main method of primary data collection. It uses eyes rather than ears and the voice. Observation can also be defined as a planned watching of the phenomenon. Observation is also defined as selection, provocation, recording and encoding. Here, selection means that there is a focus in observation and zero editing before, during and after the observation. Observation becomes a scientific tool when it serves a formulated research purpose, is systematic, planned, recorded and subject to checks on reliability. Provocation means that though observers do not destroy natural settings, subtle changes can be made in natural settings. Recording means that the observed incidents, events are recorded for subsequent analysis. Encoding means simplification of the records. What are the dimensions of the observation method of collection of the primary data? Number one, the physical action, pattern of working, pattern of begging, pattern of migration of birds, migration of human beings, actions of mentally deranged, that is physical actions. Verbal behavior, conversation between husband and wife, in-laws, colleagues, co-travelers, etc., etc. Expressing behavior, tone of voice, facial expressions, spatial relations. For example, physical distance between workers in a factory, physical distance in migratory birds, distance between wild animals. These are the spatial relations. Temporal patterns, amount of time spent performing rituals, in shopping, in talking, in traveling, etc., etc. Verbal records, content of memoranda, slogans, wildlife voices. These constitute the verbal records. Then the characteristics of the observation method of primary data collection. What are its characteristics? The behavior is observed in natural settings, not in laboratories. It enables understanding significant events affecting social relations of the participant. It determines reality from the perspective of the observed person himself. It identifies regularities and recurrences in social life by comparing data with one study and those in other studies. Observation involves some controls pertaining to the observer and to the means he uses to record data. However, such controls do not exist for the setting or subject population. It is focused on hypothesis-free inquiry. It avoids manipulation in the independent variable. Recording is not selective. These are the characteristics of the observation method of research. Now, what is the difference between observation and experimental technique? The observation technique involves fewer controls than the experimental technique. Concept of control we have already discussed. The behavior observed in observation is natural, whereas in experimental it is not always so. Behavior observed in experiment is of a smaller unit, while one in observation is more varied. In observation, fewer subjects are watched for long periods of time in more varied circumstances than in experiments. Training required in observational studies directed more towards sensitizing the observer to the flow of events, whereas training in experiments serves to sharpen the judgment of the subject. In observational study, the behavior observed is more diffused. That is the difference between observation and experimental technique. Now, purposes of the observation. What are its purposes? To capture human conduct as it actually happens, that is, say clerk's behavior in the office, tone of voice, facial expressions, and content of slogans by the demonstrators. To provide a more graphic description of social life than can be acquired in other ways. To explore important events and situations. It is used as a tool for collecting information in situations where methods other than observation cannot prove to be useful. Example, workers' behavior during a strike. This method can be used more in studies of children as they grow, where interaction is to be observed, where the phenomenon is fleeting, where there is possibility of distorting information by the subjects, where persons do not have language to describe their action events, where persons are unwilling to serve as informants. So, in all such situations, the observation remains the only data of the only method of the primary data collection. Now we come to the types of observation: participant and non-participant. Observer becomes part of the phenomenon, then it is participant. Remains detached from the phenomenon, it is non-participant observation. Suppose we are studying the problem of beggars, issue of beggars. So the researcher can become part of the phenomenon. He may join the begging for some time and learn about, collect about the data about the begging. That is participant observation. One is studying the life of daily travelers. There are thousands of people who go from, say, Aligarh to Delhi for working. They start from their houses at very early in the morning and go to Delhi for job. Come back in the night. So many of them are unable to meet or mix with their children except for the weekend, if they have any. And of course there are various aspects of their life. One wants to study their life. So what to do? It is better that he becomes a participant observer. He becomes a daily traveler. And then he collects the data about how they feel, about their job, about their transportation, about their family, about their social life, about the politics in the country. The researcher can collect all the aspects of their life by joining them as the participant observer. Whereas if the researcher does not want to become part of the phenomenon and remains detached from the phenomenon, then it is non-participant observation. See, for example, we are studying the problem of drug addiction. So, the researcher should not be joining the addiction, but he has to remain a non-participant observer, because joining the drug addiction would in fact make all the research failure. The purpose of the research would not be served by making a new person as drug addict. So, if it is so, the researcher has to remain detached from the phenomenon, and this is called the non-participant observation method. Then we have the structured or unstructured observation method. What is that? In a structured method, the researcher employs formal procedures and controls, whereas in unstructured, the researcher works in purely natural settings, loosely organized, structured and unstructured. There are some problems in which we can have some kind of a structured observation method. If we are working on the drug addiction, we can employ formal procedures and controls. But when we are studying the migratory birds, we have to go for the pure natural setting, and one has to only loosely organize. Next is the systematic and unsystematic. In the systematic observation method, systematic rules are followed and replication is possible, whereas no rules followed and no replications possible, then it is unsystematic. So, whether it is scientific, systematic or unsystematic, it depends upon whether systematic rules are followed and replication is possible. If it is so, it is systematic. Whereas if no rules followed and no replication possible, then it is in fact unsystematic. So, in case of say beggars, in case of the drug addiction, we can have systematic observation method by following the systematic rules, and replication is also possible. But in case of wildlife, in case of migratory birds, there could be no rules which could be followed and no replication is possible. So, these depends upon the type of the problem or the kind of the issue that the researcher is handling. Then we have the naive and scientific. Naive is unplanned, natural setting, whereas scientific is planned, laboratory, artificial setting. That is the naive and scientific. In laboratories, scientific method is possible, but mostly this observation method is done in the outside, in the natural setting. So in very few cases, the observation method could be planned, laboratory or artificial setting, whereas mostly the observation method or data collection is unplanned, in natural setting, and it is natural. Then comes the open and hidden. What is this open and hidden? Objects of research and researcher's identity known. That is open. And if the purpose of a study and researcher's identity not known, then it is hidden. So, if suppose somebody is working on the begging issue and the object of research, and he hides his or her identity to collect the data about the beggars, then it is the hidden observation method. Whereas is objects of research and researcher identity is well known, then it is open. So if somebody is working on the daily travelers, their life, what is their life? When thousands of them go to Delhi, work and come back. The researcher does not hide his identity, or the purpose that of the study is also well known. The daily travelers know that he is a researcher working on our life, and this is the person, this is the researcher. So it is open. Whereas if the object of research and researcher's identity is not known, then it is hidden. Next is the direct and indirect. The phenomenon is directly observed, then it is direct. Whereas if only left behind physical traces of phenomenon observed, then it is indirect. If we are studying the floods and we are studying in the aftermath, the left behind physical traces of the flood, it becomes indirect. Whereas if we are going to the flood affected areas during the flood, then it is direct, because the flood is being observed directly. Whereas if the researcher goes after floods have gone, have receded down, but he observes the left behind physical traces of the flood, then it becomes indirect. Primary data collection through the observation method. Then we have the covert and overt. Subjects unaware of being observed, it is covert. Subject aware of being observed, it is overt. In many cases of wildlife research, we have to be covert, because they know, either they will attack us or they will run away, and our purpose becomes failure. Whereas, as in the case of daily travelers, they know that they this person is doing research upon them, collecting data for us, from us, then it means it is not covert, it is overt. Then what is the process of observation? First, we select the topic, that is beggars, prisoners' life, slum dwellers, workers' strike, floods, conflicts, Bedouin life. These are examples of selection of the topic. Then choose the research site, where then third is gaining access in setting and taking role. Then fourth is jotting down the notes. Fifth is formulating analysis. Sixth is research design. Seventh is collection of the data, jotting down, recording. Eighth is analysis of the data. And ninth is report writing. Then recording of the observations, because recording is one of the most crucial aspects of the observation method. So, record notes have to be recorded as quickly as possible after the observation. Recording should take as long a period as actual observation. Everything which we observe has to be recorded. Dictating rather than writing is preferable if one can afford it. Typing is faster and preferable to handwriting because it is faster. At least 2 copies of field notes should be prepared. What are the problems, basic problems in observation? Under what conditions are observation to be made? What behavior is selected and recorded in order to obtain the information required? How stable are the conditions in which observations can be made? These are the basic problems. What is the validity of the process which has been observed or inferred? What evidence is there that some process with functional unity is being observed? Has an attempt been made to summarize what is observed in quantitative terms? Can some cases be observed in qualitative terms? The observation purpose should not be kept secret from the subjects under observation wherever possible. Information should be collected from all people or not from a few people only, in case it is possible again. There should be no commitment for anything. And in factionalized situations, taking sides should be avoided. In case of many phenomena, we have factionalized situation. So one should not take sides, the researchers especially. Sources of error: the observer, lack of ability, inconsistency, lack of knowledge, lack of familiarity, bias and distortion of facts. Purpose of a study: if not made clear to the participants, it can introduce error in information. Unrecorded error: information may be missed or inaccurately recorded. Inadequately defined categories: further, if the categories are not defined adequately, then this may affect the collection of the relevant data. Advantages are that the observation method is superior in data collection on non-verbal behavior. As we have used earlier, the I is used here. It obtains real and informal relationships which cannot be the data about which cannot be collected by other methods except the observation method. It is done in natural environment. It has a longitudinal analysis. It offers data when respondents are unable or unwilling to cooperate for giving the information. It approaches reality in natural structure and studies events as they evolve. It allows the collection of a wide range of information. However, it has some limitations also. The aspects of limitation of the primary data collection are lack of control, because the control cannot be implemented here. Difficulties of quantification, a small sample size, and if the sample size is not small, it is too large also. Gaining entry is difficult. Lack of anonymity or studying sensitive issues. Limited study, not applicable to large social settings, and few safeguards against biases of the researcher. Because if the researcher becomes biased, there are no safeguards. He will collect the biased data, and the research will be the conclusion will be biased, because it is based on the biased data. Further, it cannot study opinions and attitudes, and it cannot offer quantitative generalizations. The various aspects of the primary data collection through the observation method, or the aspects of observation method to collect the primary data, has been discussed. Now, which kind of the research problem suits this kind of, or the observation method of primary data collection, is dictated by the nature of problem that the researcher is working upon. Because if suppose the researcher is working upon, say, migratory birds, or if he is working on the beggars who will not cooperate otherwise, and or the drug addicts, or the daily travelers, then the researcher does not have any option but to go for the observation method of primary data collection. So, it is the nature of the problem that dictates whether the researcher has to adopt observation method of primary data collection or any other method. With this, I stop, and I wish I have been able to clear various things about the observation method of primary data collection. Thank you very much.